that? Unbelievable. Tracy, if you could just hit that button that says got it, that would be awesome. All right, someone want to try to read in the Hebrew?
Maybe on the laptop.
Yeah, you just, there you go. Someone want to read in the Hebrew? We're right at the top. This is the Jerusalem Talmud version. Masechet Chagiga, the tractate, which is like the sub-book. Chagiga, dealing with Chag, holidays. Daf Tet Amud Aleph, page 9a. Yes, Judy, please start us off. You want to do the Hebrew?
ארבעה נכנסו לפרדס, אחד הציץ במת, אחד הציץ בנפגע, אחד הציץ חיצי בנטיות, אחד נכנס בשלום ויצא בשלום.
Thank you so much. So, short story, although we'll see versions where it gets fleshed out a little bit more. I'm going to take us through a translation. Arba'a, or four people, so this is a group of four. Nichnesu, entered La Pardes. They went on a journey and entered the Pardes. So that's our first kind of key word of the story. Has anyone ever heard of the Pardes before? It's not Hebrew. Yeah. It is Hebrew now, but it wasn't Hebrew originally. Yeah, it was.
Oh, it means garden.
It means garden. So four enter the garden. This is a word that comes to us from a bunch of different languages. Greek, right? You probably heard it there, a garden, paradisos, and that's how it makes it into the English as paradise. So kind of an ideal garden. What would be the ideal garden? Right? The garden of what? The Gan Eden, right? They go into the original garden. And what do we find at the middle of that garden? The tree, the knowledge of good and evil. Right? I can't think of anything better that you would want to learn than like this knowledge. What is it? Let me leave that as a question because we'll come back to it. The actual root comes from the ancient Persian and Akkadian, making its way into these other languages, including Hebrew. And it means a makom gadur, a fenced-in place. Right? So it's a place that you have to kind of go through some kind of entrance. It's not like you can walk right in. It's fenced off, so it has some kind of barrier to get in there. And once you get in, it's supposed to be some kind of glorious space. And we'll sort of look at that and unpack that a little bit more. You can see it in a bunch of other places. We have it in Kohelet. We have it in the book of Ecclesiastes. It mentions it there. And the language is like the creation of the world, fruit trees, things that they really thought were significant in the Song of Songs and in many places. All right, so we have them all, four people, going into this Pardes. The first one, Echad, Hitzitz, or Hitzitz. Now, what is this word, besides being, I love words that kind of sound like what they're trying to describe, right? To peak, right? You get this little tzitz, it kind of sounds like it, right? He peeks. So one of them peeks into the garden, or they're already in the garden, but peeks at something deeper, and what happens to him? He dies. Which would tell us about what did he see?
Something you shouldn't have.
Something you shouldn't have. All I can think of is an image that is like ingrained in my mind from the movies. I don't know if you're thinking the same movie that I am.
Oh, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, there you
No,
go.
I wasn't thinking that, but I knew you were thinking.
You knew I was thinking that. That's impressive. Yes. If you remember that movie, I don't remember what year, like 1982 or something, or maybe a little later, but they're all in search of the Ark of the Covenant, and they find it, and when they open it, there is this overwhelming light, and all the people who look upon it die, melt away. Another place where you look upon something and die, biblical?
Lot's wife died.
Lot's wife, right? Turns around and sees stone and Amorah, turned into a pillar of salt. Presumably that kills her. Okay, other thoughts on the first person?
Nadav and Abihu.
Ooh, nice story. Can you bring it to all of us?
They bring strange fire when they're not supposed to and they die, but there is one interpretation that what happens to them is so awe-inspiring and impressive, and God is so impressed by their additional work that He strikes them down so that some moments of glory.
Excellent.
D'accord.
Put that on mute.
Not sure how someone got into my office and is making those sounds, but that's mysterious too. So we have Aaron's sons are engaged in their, priestly duties. They bring something that is not kosher, apparently, and have this encounter, different versions of it, but they die. And obviously a tragic loss. Remember what Aaron says, Vayidom Aaron, right? Aaron is simply silent in the face of tragedy. So we have this of like looking at something that you shouldn't see, it's too intense, and it kills you. All right, the second line. Echad hitzitz v'nifka. Right? Same thing that happens. One of them looks at it, and what's pagua? Right? This is some kind of injury. Unclear if it's, what would be our options of an injury?
Physical, mental.
Right? Is this a physical, mental, spiritual injury? Something happens to our second traveler who goes into the Pardes, and this person's injured. I'm just going to keep going, but feel free to stop me at any point with comments or questions. The third person, Echad hitzitz, kitzetz, vanitiyot. Here it's fun, how the Hebrew brings the similar sounding words. Always a nice, fun, poetic device. One peaks, kitzetz. What is kitzetz? Cuts. The nitiyot, limtoa. This is, you might remember it from Ecclesiastes, right? There's a time for mourning and a time to be born, time to die, right? A time for uprooting and a time for planting. Planting, right? Little plantings. This person looks and cuts off the plantings. What does this imply? What could it mean to cut off the plantings, the saplings? What does it feel like?
Well, you're kind of preventing the future.
Okay, so something happens to this person and they cut off the future. The future is cut off and destroyed. What else?
What's an act of destruction?
Active destruction. Right, the other people were impacted by it and destroyed on some level. And here, he's engaged, or this person is engaged in an act of violence of some kind.
It makes me wonder if that person knew what happened to the first two.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it's the first line that sort of feels like there's a connection, right? Like the first two seem, like going through it just seem sort of disparate, but that one, now you're seeing that there's some action being taken.
Right, so we have first like a passive experience, something happening to them. Now there's action, and maybe it's in response, like if you don't do something, you're gonna be harmed. Nice. Other perspectives or thoughts on it?
I'm sorry.
Rose, then Mike, then Judy.
There are degrees, there's dying and being injured is less than that, so maybe cutting off shoots is less than that.
Okay, so we're kind of moving away from maybe the intensity of the experience.
But we don't know what happened to him.
We don't know what happened to him. Okay, so engages in something,
The
but we,
other three people, the last one came and went, but this person, we don't know
what happened to him. Okay, nice. Judy?
My question is, is this happening in order? Is this linear?
Great question. right? That would go back to some of the answers we brought. Are they all going in at the same time? Does kind of one go in into this mysterious space and then come out? I don't know. What's your feeling? I mean, this is what we have. This is the
I think
text.
it's not linear,
You think not linear. And why do you say that?
because I don't know if they would have gone in after the person died, for one thing.
Okay? Thinking of like a moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark again. First person gets killed. You might be less inclined to continue on the journey. Okay, so maybe they're all walking in, and they have these experiences more simultaneously.
It also uses Echad instead of Rishonim, Sheni, and so on.
Okay. All right, so it's 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, instead of sort of a progression. Maybe the text would have given us a little bit more. We'll see in another version how this plays out. Obviously here we have, what are we missing in this story? We're missing the names of the people, which is telling us something. What could it be telling us?
It's irrelevant.
Maybe it's irrelevant, right? That this is a story that could happen, right, to any of us, a kind of a more universal experience. We will get characters in the next version. I don't mean to like spoil the excitement here, but we will get characters. All right, our last person, Chad nichnas b'shalom, v'yatza b'shalom, enters in peace and goes out in peace. So enters the garden, although it says all of them entered, but he enters in a different state. Does he look at the garden?
Perhaps, but in a different way.
Right, maybe. Doesn't have the word hate seats. And it feels different than the other three. Anyone else sort of sensing a different feeling?
It sort of implies that the other three did not enter in peace.
Right.
For whatever reason.
Okay. Right, because no one else is described in a kind of a mood or a feeling or a state of mind. So there's something about this person entering into this place that feels quite different and then gets to leave, and the only one who's unharmed or doesn't harm anything. Unclear if the third person is also harmed or changed or transformed. All right, other questions on this?
So is this a message of intentionality? So if you go into a situation or with certain intentions, you have ramifications?
Right? I mean, it certainly could be. If you just walk into something, and especially if it's a powerful experience, maybe that's kind of dangerous and leads you in one place.
What's wrong?
And to the four who are about to enter our garden, they quickly turned around. That was a hate seat. That was. Judy.
Were the other three entered in gain, were they judging or looking for something? But when he entered in peace, was he entering with trust or faith, just being there?
Okay. I mean, this is what we have. There's no, I think it's open to all of those readings.
Someone has a hand raised.
Oh, someone has a hand raised. Thank you for keeping their eye on the Zoom here. Who wanted to jump in from home?
Yeah.
Well, I had raised my hand, but someone else made the same point.
Okay, well, that's always good to know that you're in good company. Anyone else want to jump in? I'm sorry, I'll try to figure out how to get everyone in both places. Okay,
JS.
JS. I don't know who JS is. Where do I see JS? But if you'd like to make a comment, feel free to unmute and jump in. Okay, all right, let's go to the next version of the story. So on page 3, we actually have some of the verses connected to these 4 people. I'm going to come back to page 3, but I want to first attach names. And to do that, let's go to the version, let's continue with the Yerushalmi version. So let's go to the one here. You see there's a bunch of them on pages 4 and 2 on pages 4 and 5. One is Chagiga 14b, it appears, and one is 9a. So let's look at the one on 9a on page 5. All right, so this is where we took the text that we just saw. Arba nichnasu lepardes. We have the core text. It's exactly the same, but now it fleshes it out. And I'm sorry it doesn't have all of the nikud, all of the vocalization, but I'll read some of it, and you can follow in the Hebrew or in the English. So we have the same lines: 4 entered the pardes, 1 gazed and died, 1 gazed and was injured, 1 gazed and cut down the saplings, 1 entered in peace and exited in peace. Ben Azai, anyone remember this name, Ben Azai? The next line, Ben Zoma. What? They're Tanaim, so they're from the earliest generation of rabbis, living just after the destruction of the first temple. And they actually appear in another text, Haggadah, in the Haggadah.
Yeah.
It's late at night, so sometimes we don't always remember that whole night, but they do make their way into the Haggadah at the Pesach Seder. And so this is a Mishnah from Masechet Brachot. This is a text from the Mishnah, which talks about how we remember the Exodus from Egypt. And it says, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, behold, I'm like 70 years old, yet I was not privileged to mention the Exodus at nighttime until Ben Zoma expounded the following verse, right? In order that you remember all the days that you left Egypt, all the days of your life. The days of your life refers to the days, all the days of your life refers to the night. Sages say days of the life of your life refers in this world, all the days of your life serve to include the Messianic era. So that's kind of one of his famous places because the Haggadah is a more commonly used text. All right, so that's Ben Zoma and Ben Azai. And then, by the way, they get confused a lot. If your name is the son of someone and you don't have a first name, then often like that gets confusing, and we'll see that they actually get swapped in some of the versions. But I wouldn't get too stuck on that. We're going to go with one of the tellings. Ben Azai hitzitz v'nifga, right? He looks and got injured. So we see it got flipped in terms of the order, but I don't, at least to me, there's not a huge difference. Although if we went with the consecutive, right, that they didn't all enter at the same time, maybe it does make a difference because the first person is being injured and doesn't die. Alava katuv, devash matzata echol dayecha pen tispe'enu v'hakeoto. This is from the book of Mishlei, from the book of Proverbs, chapter 25. You can see it in the English. If you find honey, eat only what you need, lest gorging yourself, you throw it up. Yeah, it's a little bit more fleshed out. No, in the previous page, on page 3, it's just the same verse. So what on earth, they have this text, presumably the rabbis who were weaving together the Talmud want to bring a proof text. This is one of their famous and favorite activities to do. They know the Tanakh pretty much cold. They were like the Google of the time. So they pretty much knew a verse for everything, but here they actually want to teach something. So they want to find a verse that relates to what's happening. How do you relate this to what's happening? What does it mean? If you find honey, eat only what you need, lest gorging yourself, you throw it up. What does it feel like? What's this about?
That to me is something that's overwhelming. And what comes to my mind is Moses of Sinai and God saying, don't, you can't see my face lest you die.
Okay, nice. So first of all,
if it's really good, if it's too much,
okay,
it'll
overwhelm you. First of all, that's a great story to bring to our learning here, because Moshe asked to see God's presence. I can't think of like a more intense experience, and it's too much. God protects him, right? And actually it says like covers him up in the cleft of the rock. This is too intense an experience. emotionally, spiritually, what have you, intellectually, this is too much. Now here, it's a little bit different.
Don't be greedy.
Don't be greedy. And the greed
Yeah.
is, Harold?
Well, I was going to say that in later times, didn't that gluttony become one of the 7 deadly sins?
Okay. That of course gets picked up by a breakaway group of Jews. But yeah, so we have that the rabbis are saying that Ben Azai is greedy. Tracy?
So 2 things come to mind. One is the idea of mindful eating, and Leviticus and all our rules about kashrut are related to that in some sense. And then also I think about the 4th or the last person who entered in peace and exited in peace, didn't gaze, entered, and may have had a more mindful perspective in their gaze.
Interesting. Okay. So how do you approach that? Other thoughts? Yeah, Rose and then Yossi.
He has chosen to overexpose himself. It's his decision, it doesn't just happen to him.
Okay. So, right, so we have Ben Azai, right? The rabbis aren't saying he looked and then something happened to him. He's actually, right? It could be looking, by the way. This could all be a metaphor. But something happens. Let me take Yossi and Eric and Sylvia.
So expanding on Rose, I think it's about self-control. So you peak and your amount of control of how you handle what happens, right? So it says, "Echol dayecha." Echol is an action that you take. You're not forced to eat. So it's about, go into this situation with an amount of self-control and don't allow yourself to get out of hand.
Okay. And what is he eating?
It doesn't really matter, but dvash matzah means you look, you find something, stay under control and don't overdo whatever you find that's out there. Don't let yourself just run uncontrolled.
Okay, nice. I was immediately drawn to like Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
Gets his honey and he just can't get enough, and then he has a tummy ache, right? He couldn't get enough of this honey. Presumably here it's a metaphor, but you get a sense of it. Eric and then Sylvia.
I think this, expanding on it this way, it connects the individual to the community. In a way, the first one, in just in the text, you gaze and you die, and that person's there. But here, it's very much only what you need, implying that others need something. This honey's not just for you.
Oh, I see.
It's for others. So it puts that person in sort of a context of others, where when I first read it, without sort of this expansion, it all seemed very individualistic.
Right, nice reading, right? Everyone got that right. Eat what you need. There are other people who need to eat this. Maybe the other people in the group, maybe others. Don't hog this all for yourself and take it.
The Winnie the Pooh metaphor falls apart.
Yeah,
Nobody else eats honey in
right,
the story.
that's right. But I do like honey a lot. And I knew where my cup of tea was. I would definitely be drinking it, which is honey.
Why does it say was died? Is that?
Which one are you on?
Ben Azai gazed and was died is the translation, is that correct?
It's injured, probably.
Right, so that one is just cross that line out.
Okay.
It's Ben Azai gazed and was nifga, was injured.
Okay.
As I said, they get flipped around in a bunch of different places, but he's the one who gets injured. And, right, and the injury is, well, let me come back to that in 1 second. Let me just get Sylvia. Sylvia, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, this could be, the honey could be a metaphor for entering into the Pardes. And if you do too much of this wonderful thing, it's too much. You need to be careful of how much you're going to do this holy thing.
Okay, so you're in the garden, and how much do you take in of that, either physically by eating it or by seeing it? Now, the last phrase I think is important too. which we didn't really get into because maybe it's messy. No, it's fine. What about the last phrase? Did that strike anyone?
Throw up.
You throw up. I mean, help me out here. What is it? What does it mean? What could it mean? What does it feel like?
Clearly a rejection, a very visceral.
Yeah. I mean, throwing up is a little bit violent, right? He took in too much and violently had to get rid of everything that was taken in.
But you could look at it two ways. It could either be like a punishment, or it could be your body knowing that it needs to cleanse itself and releasing your toxins and purifying yourself.
Okay, right, you sometimes throw up because you've eaten something that's, I don't know, dangerous, poisonous, it's gonna make you sick, and your body immediately protects yourself by saying, this is too overwhelming. And then I'm curious about how we bring it into the metaphor, Henry and Rose, and then Harold.
I think there's a metaphor here in that light is good. I mean, it illuminates the world. But look at the sun and you'll be blinded. Too much. You're exceeding your capacity to understand it.
Nice. You can peek at the sun, right? But you can't look at it too much or else it's gonna hurt you. Rose?
Kind of like an overflowing cup, that there's only so much that you can take and your body rejects the excess.
Okay. Harold?
And pretty much along the same lines that good things become bad things in excess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tracy?
So I had been wondering if the injured person died after the injury or not, and this implies not.
Right. They were protected from it with this visceral reaction. Some more peekers. And doesn't die. All right, let's go to the next one. So,
One insight into the throw up thing?
yeah,
By
please.
using it back. All of it comes back. You don't get any of it ultimately.
So you didn't, so you had the experience, and then it's lost. All the sweetness that you had taken in, it's gone. It's gone. Although maybe the act of eating it had its own sweetness in that moment. Maybe you retain some memory of that. I don't know. I don't want to get too much into the metaphor. might be overwhelming. All right, let's go to benzoma. Here it's flipped. Sorry about the English being a little bit out of order. That first line where it says Ben Azai gazed and was died in that large paragraph, that you should that should just be crossed out. That's wrong. It should be Ben Azai gazed and was injured. Just change the word died to injured there. As I said, the two of them get flipped around a lot, so that happens a lot.
But
All right.
the quotes make it, well, you'll see the quotes.
All right, so we'll do benzoma.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So benzoma hitzitz me, right? He's the one who peeked in and died. Allah v'katuv, here's his quote. Yakar be'inei Adonai hamavta l'chasidah. Right, we have in the English from Psalm 116, the death of God's faithful ones is precious in the eyes of Adonai. All right. What's this quote? What's the point of this proof text?
Is this from the Psalms?
This is from the Psalms. This is Psalm 116, what verse is it? 15. Okay. This does appear in our davening.
Yeah, wasn't there something about the choir faithful singing that is exalted but in the eyes of God?
Okay. So Chasidav, the righteous one from the word Chasid, right? Chasidim are right, these pious people. Get into if they are today, but in any case, right? You have the Chasidav, these are the pious ones, and they become part of some degree of holiness. I do believe this line is used, and it's in Hallel, just to see how it gets used liturgically. Hallel, the songs that we sing on the holidays. Rose?
Isn't it sometimes translated as grievous in the eyes of the Lord?
That's what it says in the,
In Sepharia, yeah?
Yeah.
Grievous, interesting.
So which one
That's
is
yakar.
That's yakar.
Yakar is not grievous.
Yeah, I would struggle with that translation, but they must have some kind of root to get there. I don't know what that is. In the translations that I looked up, it was all the same. Yakar is something expensive, is something precious, is something valuable. Now, what does it mean, valuable in the eyes of God is the death?
It does seem very counter to a lot of things we believe in Judaism. Like it's, you know, like we're not into kamikaze culture, but I don't know how to understand this, because also then it implies that he didn't do anything wrong when he went in there. Like the peeking wasn't wrong because it was actually an act of faith. So then what is really going on here?
Our original approach was that something went wrong.
Yeah.
But here, it's like the opposite.
Yeah.
He is elevated into this status, which I think you're right, the tradition is uneasy with. Just before I take a couple more comments, right? Where is this notion of being elevated in death in our tradition? So maybe in the Akedah, and certainly in the Midrashic readings of the Akedah, right? Isaac does die, and so it's kind of a precious death. There's this notion that is developed called Kiddush Hashem. Anyone ever heard of this concept?
It's like Kaddish.
Right, so Kiddush Hashem is the sanctification of God's name. That my death is actually so valuable, it is a kind of a lifting up of God's name.
Like anytime you die?
No, I would say for a greater purpose.
Oh, okay.
When you die for a greater purpose.
Yeah, it's being a martyr.
Yeah, it's a martyrdom.
It's martyrdom that has a purpose. Now, by the way, just before I take Yossi, just to give you just the historical context, these four people, and I apologize we didn't get to the last two. The last one's Rabbi Akiva. Do we know anything about them historically?
Well,
Killed by
like,
the Romans?
yeah.
What?
Were they killed by the Romans?
They're all killed by the Romans. The ones, well, who didn't die by other causes. Right. Rabbi Akiva and his followers are in the year 132, right? One of the stories here in the Haggadah is that they stay up all night, right, telling the story of the Exodus. And one of the common scholarly theories is that they're staying up all night, planning the Bar Kokhba revolt. And Bar Kokhba is inspiring them as a kind of messianic figure to revolt against Rome, which is really hard to imagine because 60 years earlier they had a revolt against Rome. And how did that go?
Not so well.
Not so well, like really badly. Like half the people, I don't know the numbers, we think like a third to half the Jewish people are killed. Second only, in terms of tragedy to the Shoah, to the Holocaust, maybe to the destruction of the first temple. You have this, it's a terrible event. And the people who are left are killed by the Romans in horrific ways. And they become part of the martyrdom service on Yom Kippur when we remember them, right? One of the famous ones, I can't remember how, they're terrible. Rabbi Akiva, I believe, is flayed.
The bed of nails.
What?
The bed of nails. On the bed of nails.
Bed of nails, maybe is one of them. I mean, I'm thinking of like, Harold, did you want to jump in?
Well, you're right. Rabbi Akiva is flayed, but I think the part that also works its way into this story is he says he sees the letters of the Torah rising before him as he dies, and he's saying the Shema, which I guess is a traditional thing.
So Rabbi Akiva says the Shema, and presumably others do. The one you're thinking of is Hanania ben Tradium, and it's a very powerful image. And maybe these images are in the back of the mind of who's assembling this Talmudic text, right? Has this core story and the characters, and is bringing these proof texts. Hanania ben Tradium is wrapped in the Torah scroll and burned alive.
Right.
And it says to his followers who are right outside, who see this, his students, and presumably the Romans wanted them to see this, to say, like, don't do this anymore, don't revolt. And he has this vision of the letters taking wing, and that they continue, and that the tradition exists even beyond one person. And that would be an example of a kiddush Hashem, right, of a lifting up. In the tradition, they want to say this person is now been, elevated. In the midst of this tragedy, I would look at it and just say, this is a terrible tragedy, but they're trying to find something good. Other thoughts on, Tracy?
Masada comes to mind.
Right,
Where
so.
they sacrifice their lives.
Right, so they're so righteous, they are willing to give their lives for the tradition. Now, I want to just look at the text carefully. How are they saying that he dies? Or what can we maybe take out of this proof text? Yakar be'enei Adonai, it's precious in the eyes of God, hamavta, the death of the righteous, which would imply that what's happening? Who's initiating? How does this connect to God? Is God killing him?
It's like he collapsed, died.
It's like he collapsed, died, right? It happened to him, the death of the righteous. And then God is in fact doing what? He's what?
Exalting him.
Exalting, like analyzing this. This is the way, or the text is saying, this is how this kind of event is to be understood. That he is on some kind of righteous level, and he dies. I want to bring it back to where Rose led us earlier, right? The story of Nadav and Abihu is interpreted first very simply that they did something wrong in the biblical text and were killed. But there are Midrashim, and I prefer reading, because I like to read it the opposite way, that like they had some kind of intense experience and it was too intense and it was overwhelming and they died like coming too close to the fire. Like a moth who is attracted to this light, but the light consumes them and they're overwhelmed. And they're then, one other word jumps out here at me. I don't know if it jumps out with you, right? It's describing God a little bit. And how does it describe God? That God, right, be'enei Adonai, in the eyes of God. And that God is seeing him. Whereas the whole beginning of the story is where the characters are peeking and seeing something. Is it God? Is it the mystery of the universe? Is it the most delightful vision? Unclear what's in this paradise. But they're all peeking, and here God says, this is the way I now see you.
See as in understand.
See as in understand, which could be what they're doing too. Right? That they're going into the Pardes and having now some understanding of this mysterious space and understanding. Rose?
Yeah, so I guess it's obvious that he's not sinning, doing anything wrong. He's one of the faithful.
He's good.
And also the other, when you find favor in the eyes of someone, is sort of common Hebrew thing.
Right? Yeah. And so we have that phrase get picked up in another places. Yossi?
So there's, I'll present an alternative view.
Great.
Maybe this is all about mental health, right? So the one who was injured, mental health, the one who died, took his own life. And that's why it says life is so precious to God. Right? And he says Vanetiot went crazy and started hurting things around it.
Interesting.
Wow.
Which then brings us back to, what is Rabbi Akiva, who is the fourth one, what's his state of mind? Nice. So let's jump into the third one if we're okay, where we are. I think there's always more to say about each of these, and you'll see it in the tradition. Just one thing I wanted to bring in the backdrop as we keep going. This literature comes from, or is related to what we call Hechalot literature. I don't know if anyone ever heard of Hechalot. There's kind of a few different mystical tracks in the tradition. One comes from Ezekiel. Ezekiel is like one of the earliest science fiction writers. We were talking a little bit about him in yesterday's Mincha class. Right? He is he's just way out there. Some people think he was on, some kind of additional substances. Some people just thought he's like a very creative thinker. And when the temple's destroyed at the beginning of his prophecy, he imagines, right, this chariot with God's throne and angels with wings, and the whole thing takes flight and goes with the exiles to Babylonia. And so that is one of the types of like chariot mystical literature, is riffing off of Ezekiel. The other one is Hechalot. Hechal is the palace. And so this is like palace literature, right? That there are different palaces, and you want to get through each palace using certain words. You say God's name unlocks the next palace. You've probably read similar things or seen movies or TV shows or other forms of literature and art that kind of give you this. And of course, you want to get to the seventh palace, the seventh heaven is where you're trying to get to. And when you get there, then you have this full experience of whatever it is. Unclear.
So it's not gates, it's palaces?
Hechalot.
Yeah.
Right, Hechal is like one of the palaces. It's one of the words for the Beit HaMikdash. So presumably, like as you go in intensity, you're getting into a holier of holiers and things like that. I tried to do some research on Hechalot literature back in college, and one of the things that's hard to guess is what's the timing. When is the literature from? And the versions that we have, are they earlier than these texts, or are they later? And that's unfortunately like a scholarly debate, because there's actually a lot of neat things in the Hechalot, like it has a lot of pieces of our service, and it echoes a lot of things that are in the tradition. So if it is in fact earlier, it may be the source of a lot of things that become part of the tradition. All right, let's look at the third one. We have a name. It's a name, sort of. Who is the name is right there off the bat. Acher. What is Acher or Achar or Acharei?
Yeah.
After, or in this case,
Other.
other.
The other.
The
Other.
other. Thank you, Sylvia. By the way, your video is not on if you do want it to be on.
No, it's okay.
Okay, that's fine. You will actually be the mystical disembodied voice
Fine.
that we're searching for in the text. So who is Acher? Who is the other?
The heretic.
The heretic. It's an actual person, although I want to offer that it doesn't have to be just this actual person as a reading. Who is the actual person? Yeah, Rose.
Elisha ben Abuya.
Right, Elisha ben Abuya, Elisha the son of Abuya, who is a well-known character. You might have read about him in Milton Steinberg's great 20th century, mid-20th century work.
As a driven leaf.
And, it's kind of a classic of this period and talks about Acher, why he becomes Acher. Why would you lose your name in rabbinic times? He has a name, but he becomes other. What does this mean? He's kicked out of the community. He's excommunicated. Now, there are different stories about exactly what he did, and we'll see some of them. Over the next 2 weeks, what I want to do is delve into these characters more deeply and try to understand them a little bit more from other sources in the tradition. But clearly, if you lose your name, you're put in cherem. Cherem is you're excommunicated. And what's interesting about Acher, Elisha ben Abuya, is that he's put in cherem, but he's still like such an amazing scholar and figure. They like don't eliminate him entirely. Right? He's quoted throughout the Talmud, and his interpretations are still mentioned, which is a kind of a strange thing. And there are still stories about him and how he relates to his student, and how his student still loves him and cares for him. So it's very powerful to sort of think about that in the backdrop of what he's going to do. Yeah.
I'm wondering two things. One is how does the name Acher translate, and also why was he excommunicated? Do we know that?
So I'll take the second one first, right? We have stories about why he's excommunicated, that he left the traditional belief. Why did he leave the traditional belief? This may be one of the moments that causes him. The other Talmudic story, and if I forgot if I put it in the packet, and I apologize, there's a lot of stories. If you flip around in Zoma, I think Acher is after him, and I tried to put in, texts from different places. Right, so we have one of the stories about why he gets excommunicated here on page 19. So I'll kind of save it for the next two classes. One of the theories I think I didn't put in here is, I'm trying to see if it's here. Yeah, this is a different one. So, this is an amazing one. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the stories is he's told, he sees a boy who's told by his father to go climb up a ladder and get the eggs for food from this nest. And the Torah says that if you need eggs for food, you shoo away the mother bird, presumably because you don't want the mother bird to see you doing this. Although, presumably it's still bad when the mother bird gets back. But the idea is that you don't want to inflict additional pain on animals, and this is how the Torah understands it. And so this boy is fulfilling two mitzvot. One is he's listening to his parents. He's honoring his parents by doing what he's told, and he's shooing away the mother bird, falls off the ladder and dies. Elisha sees this and says, this is just wrong. Right? The Torah says, in these cases, it says, if you do these things, it says this with the shooing away of the mother bird, you will live a long life. And he sees this, and he's like, that's it. This system doesn't work. What I've been taught is broken. And so he breaks with it. And he is so hurt by that. So I'll leave that in the back, because this could be another reason. So acher, by the way, acharei, after, acher, other. Right? He is the other. Right? We talk about this in our world today. Who is someone who's seen as an other? That is in fact his name. And so how the rabbis then refer to him, although we see in the other text that sometimes his name reappears. All right, acher hitzitz v'kitzetz panetiot. Little fun poetry here. Peaks and cuts the saplings. Alava katuv, what's his proof text? From Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes, which we already know as being a book that's a little, there's a few ways to look at it, like a more depressing book, maybe my summary, right? It's not always looking at the world through a positive lens, right? Hakol Havel. Everything is Havel, is, some translate as meaningless. It's hard to find meaning in the world. So the fact that that's the book that they're choosing is, I would say, not an accident. Here's the verse. Al titein picha lechatei et besarecha. Then it says begomer. Okay, so that means you want to look a little bit more at this verse. And so turn back to page 3, and you'll see the whole text. Okay, everyone see it? Page 3. I'm in the 3rd paragraph, the full verse from Ecclesiastes. Sometimes in the rabbinic text, they assume you know it, so they start a verse, and they're like, oh, you should know that one, so they don't give the whole verse. Don't forget, there's also no citations in the actual text of the Talmud, so I assume you know it. Nowadays, luckily, I can just type in any text into Safari or Google, and I don't need to know it in the same way. Do not let your tongue lead your flesh into sin, and then plead before the messenger of God that it was a mistake, or God will be angry at your talk and destroy the work of your hands. Okay, so I want to understand that quote. We could spend a little time there, but just so you see, there is another line there. Shechibel Maseh Yadav Shaloto Aish. All right, I'm gonna leave that aside and just deal with the verse. I realize time is fleeting. Help me out with this verse. What jumps out at you from this verse from Ecclesiastes? And obviously, also, how do we tie it into this character? Yeah, Mavis, please.
Strikes me as about taking responsibility and not
Okay.
blaming others for what you in your unthinking behavior or unthinking talk, you got yourself in trouble, don't blame other people.
Nice. Okay, Dan?
Actions have consequences and think before you act.
Okay. Others? Yeah, Rose.
But it's talking before you do the action. That seems to be important. There's also honey in that other, book that we have.
So is tongue relating to talking or relating to eating?
Let's say that.
Tongue, the word tongue, is that related to talking or eating, or both?
I guess it is talking, because the next part is, God will be angry with your talk.
Well, there are two actions by man and two actions by God, right? Man does something bad and man lies about it, and then gods get angry and God punishes man.
Okay. There's some nice symmetry in the verse. Do not let your tongue lead your flesh into sin.
Yeah.
So, right, what is your flesh doing there?
Maybe you're convincing yourself that it's not a sin, that it's really okay to do this, because I'm really hungry and I need that ham sandwich.
Okay.
It's not really ham, because.
Okay, nice reading. Others?
To use a political thing, it's like you committed the act, but covering it up is the worst sin.
Okay, right? Destructive there.
Similar to the thought of, don't listen to your own rhetoric.
Okay.
Today's parlance of politics.
Okay, Tracy?
There's like an assumption that he lied or is covering it up, but it just says, plead before the messenger of God that it was a mistake. Maybe he's owning it and taking responsibility and not lying.
Interesting, right? Maybe you could read it each way, like that.
Can we attack a George Santos moment? You say something and then you cause you to sin, and then you say to God again, oh, I'm pleading.
Okay.
I didn't really mean that. It's George Santos.
Okay, someone else who wants to?
But which,
Yeah, Harold.
which act of speech is God punishing you for? The original sinning act or trying to deceive God?
Interesting. Okay, unclear. I mean, I can read it either way from this. It feels a little bit to me like there's a classic Mishnah about Yom Kippur. And it says that the worst sin you could possibly do is say, I will sin, but it's fine because I'll say I will repent. And the rabbis put this over everyone, over every sin. Like you could rob from the poor and the widow and the orphan, which seems really bad. And they're like, no, that's not as bad. And they put that as like the highest category because, and those of you taking my 7th grade class might remember it from there, they put it as the worst category because what can you then do?
Anything.
You can basically do anything. You've now like gamed the system. And so you can actually do anything you want. And you can plead and say, okay,
That is
fine.
That is the Christian theory.
Okay. All right.
Well, plus you know you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's inadvertent what you do wrong.
Okay.
This is deliberate.
So how do you read that beginning? Oh wait, Tracy, and then I'm just curious. How do you read, do not let your tongue lead you? I don't know if you
Well,
want
I
to go
was
there.
just going to respond to the sense of intentionality because there's two ways to look at it. Like a lot of times a parent, when a kid is little, they'll say, oh, you didn't know any better, but now that you know, there will be a consequence. You should have known better. And then there's another, more of a Buddhist perspective, I would say, where they would say, knowing that you might cause harm in your speech to somebody or in your action is okay, is better than this other approach, because you have an opportunity to learn and grow from it, in terms of the reaction you get. And so if you do something without knowing, you will continually, I can press your buttons not knowing and keep on doing it, and there's no chance to learn. But if I'm aware that I might make you angry by what I say, or you tell me that you're angry, I have a chance to grow, to evolve.
Interesting. Nice. Any other thoughts about our friend Acher here? Okay, I want to get,
Can I just say that there's a phrase left out of that quote, which is, you should, but fear God is missing from that, right?
where is that part? Is that,
I mean, it's in the translation part, because it indicates there's no fear.
that he doesn't have fear of God, right, and therefore there's no consequences to the action. Okay, the other thing that I'll keep in your mind is what he's doing. What does it mean to cut the saplings?
Yeah.
Is it a literal thing? What is it a metaphor? And if so, for what? What could saplings be?
The work of your hands.
The work of your hands. His hands, maybe someone else's hands, right?
I was thinking in terms of tying it to the off there as like children.
Right.
You know, misguiding children,
Right.
potentially.
Right, and cutting off the future of the tradition, the future of the Jewish people, right, or literally being destructive towards children, which we would obviously, I think, put in a really bad category.
I keep coming back to the original, they entered paradise, the garden, in your talk of the garden of knowledge of good and evil, and how these, so far the three that we've read about, have impacted. So we're talking about the here, not of taking away from what the community is trying to do with their young people, just for the sake of making a point.
Mm.
And he separated himself from the community.
Yeah. Ooh, there's a lot more here. I realize I got two quick points, and then I want to just not leave out our friend Rabbi Akiva, who obviously is kind of like the hero of the story. Rose and Dan.
It's about Adam and Eve, and her adding an extra bit about you can't even touch the tree leads them to eat of the tree, and then they take no responsibility for it. You know, that the snake made them do it.
Right, talk their way out of it. Nice, brings us right back to the original.
So maybe I'm looking at this too literally, but one of the several things that I'm not clear on in this is the two prior only do a passive, what appears to be a passive act of gazing, and they incur injury and death.
Mm.
Whereas a hare has an active, what appears to be an active act, and there's no physical consequence.
Right.
I can see, but.
Interesting, right?
So
what happens to him and what happens to others if we see this as children, obviously, a devastating impact. All right, let me get to the last one. I don't want to leave without Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, Nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom, enters in peace, leaves in peace. Alav HaKatuv, Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs that we read on Pesach, which, by the way, is his favorite book. It's a sexual poetry between two young lovers, and he reads it as the love between God and Israel. And he says it's the greatest work, it's the most intense work, because he reads it as this entirely elaborate metaphor. So it's not an accident that they put from Song of Songs. And what's the verse? Let's again go back to 3 so you can see the whole verse. Moshcheni acharecha narutza havieni hamelech hadarav nagila v'nismecha ba nazkira dodecha miyayin nesharim ahevucha. right? Draw me after you, let us run. The king has brought me into his chambers. Let us rejoice and recall your love, which is more precious than wine. What's the feeling of Rabbi Akiva's verse, and how does it connect to his experience? Who's saying, draw me after you, let us run? The king has brought me to his chambers. How are the rabbis reading this? The kings are always big giveaways.
King is God,
The king is God.
so the people of Israel are sheep.
Okay, right? In this metaphor, the people of Israel are saying to the king, to God, let us run. If we go back to the actual story, Rabbi Akiva is entering and saying to God, to this mystical experience, let's go off together. And I've been brought into this chamber, right? Into this sacred space, which is the first time we have an actual space, which of course we entered into a space at the beginning of this whole narrative. What's the feeling here?
That God's the one who encourages him to enter the garden.
Come into this garden.
There's euphoria here.
There's euphoria here, right? Rabbi Akiva enters into a kind of mystical oneness, like two lovers coming together, and he is in a state of joy with God's presence. I've been brought into this sacred space, into God's chambers. Very kind of sexual imagery, but also can play out mystically as the whole story wants us to be thinking of. Other thoughts as we close with our friend Rabbi Akiva. Obviously, he has a very different experience than everyone else. There's also nothing that he's looking at, right? And it's passive, right? Nichnas, he went in, and he went out, right? Does he see anything? Does he do anything? Does anything happen to him at all? Yeah, I didn't see if it was Yossi or Yossi and Meyer.
Well, I took the word no roots off, right? So he's actually you often run away from things. So he's in the Pardes, he's running away from the dangers in the Pardes into a room, a chamber, which is actually a protected space. It's actually he's heading into a safe place in the Pardes where he'll be protected from the other things in it.
Nice. Okay. Very different than his co-fellow travelers.
So just, and this is something that can open up a whole can of worms we can talk about in the future. But the first three gaze, they saw, they looked. Rabbi Akiva says, or whoever the third person is, the fourth person, had no vision, they were not looking at all. So when I read this the first time, I had this image of the three people, the first three looking, and the last one sort of blindly entered, walked through, and left without seeing anything, meaning that maybe they could have looked but didn't. This is all problematic to me, because it also means mind your own business, go through life, and you'll exit the other side happy, which is a big problem.
Because he's not
discuss
having an impact on the world, you're saying.
Right,
It's
exactly.
like separate from the world.
Because it says it didn't see, specifically leaves out looking at anything around him.
Well, a final thought or two, and then we'll pause for today. Yeah, Meili.
To build on that, what strikes me as very strange is they've gone into a garden, a thing of beauty, the ultimate paradise, and yet these awful things are happening, and this last person is not looking at all. Like, is it about like the temptation of the tree of knowledge of good and evil kind of filling out the whole garden? That it's not one item, but actually the whole thing is just a big basket of temptation, and you really need to kind of protect yourself. But that seems like a really cruel trick to make a garden that only select people can go in as that
So you're-
dangerous.
Are you saying he's chosen, or does he go in a certain way and then have like the correct experience of the garden? Or is it already predetermined, like he is ready to do that?
I took a couple steps back and just thinking about why would you have a garden that's really not a thing of beauty? It's like, that's a trick.
Okay, yeah,
So like,
Tracy and then Harold.
sorry.
Yes, okay.
There's an assumption that he did not look, that we're making, that it's not clear to me that we can assume that. It could be that he is gazing everywhere and, or only in the safe room, but we all have a choice to look around and see suffering or to see joy. And if you're in a garden, there's a lot of joy to see, and maybe this person saw the joy.
Harold and then Rose, and we'll close it.
And I'm just wondering whether this isn't really an allegory for a kind of spiritual piece or being prepared to enter Olam Haba.
The next world, Olam Haba,
Yeah.
that they are getting ready for, or they're seeing what's in the next world, okay?
Let me just, can I just add one little thing to that? Which is that the others are not prepared. They should not be entering this garden at all, or they are therefore, they come out damaged in one, to various extents. Whereas
Okay.
he enters fully prepared and then he leaves without apparent damage.
Okay, hold on to that thought, because we're gonna come back to it and see if they are given directions or not in one of the other texts. Yeah, Rose.
I mean, it's problem of translation, and he seeks means to gaze, means to look, it's one thing, if it means to peek, it sounds like they're sneaking.
And they don't really belong there. They're sort of like, a fourth grader peeking into our class. They know that this isn't the right place. So this is the start of the journey. What I'd like to do, and keep your packets if you have them, please bring them back next week, is that I want to look in more depth we have the 4 characters, in a little bit more depth into them through these other texts, and hopefully unpack some more layers of meaning and see how this can fit in with our own lives and what we're looking for in terms of knowledge and maybe spirituality as well. Thank you, everyone, for the great discussion.
Yeah, thanks.